This is Digital Voices with Bo Tiffany. Inspiring and providing real insight to our listeners with every story. Exploring deep stories behind every guest. Please welcome your host, Bo Tiffany.
Hi, Rosa. Thanks for coming on the podcast today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. You know, when I first came across or crossed paths with you, I should say, I was really keenly interested on what you do. So you're a leadership coach and career strategist with a passion to change corporate culture. I also saw something about wanting to change the world, and I I can relate to that. So what I'd like to do is kind of figure out a little bit about your roots, and then we'll kind of find out who you are and go from there. So where are you from originally?
Well, we'll go deep in. I born and raised in Southern California to two immigrant parents that came from Mexico. They both were born and raised in a region of Michoacan, a suburb of the capital of Michoacan, which is Morelia. And they immigrated as adults and actually met in LA. My mom was living with family, and my father would travel to LA to visit his family or a sister that he had out there. And they met and fell in love and got married and had kids. They always planned to go back to Mexico, but decided that they just decided to settle here. And one of the things that I can point to growing up in that family is, number one, culture was very important to us in the sense of family and community and helping each other and just seeing each other regularly. So those were family values that I've kept to this day, and has been super helpful in just being whole and part of being happy in life.
Yeah. Big family, small family?
They had big families. So I have tons of aunts and uncles and cousins and nieces and nephews. So that whole family thing is very real. My mom's the oldest of 10 people, and my father was the oldest of 14. And they only had 4 kids themselves. So I have a handful of siblings, and it's been nice.
Nice. What kind of things were you interested in early on?
So growing up, I grew up very close with both of my parents, but my father, he was a blue-collar worker. He worked with concrete a lot, and he was the sole provider for our household. So my mom was the homemaker. And even back then, my father was unique in that he was very much a person that equipped females. My mother and him were a team. He could have very easily just ran the household, but he really shared that duty with her, and they together were very good financially in terms of saving and making sure that we had all of our essentials, and they were very responsible. And one of the ways that they were responsible is my father's income. They would use it to invest into the mortgage and to save. And then my father would have side gigs where he would flip cars and just fix different things and use that money for some of the bills. So
Sure.
they were both really good at that. So I learned how to build things, how to fix things, how to work in different types of, whether it was plumbing, fixing a plumbing issue, or concrete, or fixing a car. Like, I learned so much from my dad growing up.
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah.
Those tools kind of carried with you, into your adult life too.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Primarily, the biggest lesson from all of that isn't so much that I needed to build, even though I still enjoy doing house projects. What I learned is that everything had a solution and everything could be fixed. And even if something was broken, you could still repurpose it. And so, they just really taught me to be very efficient and not live outside my means.
Yeah. I like that bit that you just shared about repurposing and kind of thinking outside of the box. Sounds like you've diversified too. All these skills that you've had tell us about high school. What was your strengths there, and what were you?
I was a pretty quiet kid, and I think part of that was because growing up, I actually didn't learn English until I went to school. And at home, it wasn't that English was discouraged, because obviously we needed to learn English, but because some people in the household at different times wouldn't understand what we were saying, we were considered rude if we only spoke Spanish or spoke English. So we were encouraged to always speak Spanish in the home. And so when I went to school, I was kind of shy about just speaking. Even though I was fluent, eventually by first, second grade, I was fluent in English. I was still kind of quiet. I would just pay attention and listen a lot. And in high school, I started to evolve when I started playing soccer. Growing up with immigrant parents, they didn't necessarily understand all the activities that you have in America, and that you can, be an AYSO or different things, different extracurricular activities. And also, I was needed at homes for some of the projects, so I didn't really pursue a lot of activities until high school. And I really enjoyed being in a team and being around other driven women that, were competitive and were very skilled. And so I enjoyed those interactions. And that was probably where I started to evolve and really find my confidence in my voice.
Sure. Did you have some early influencers, people that came in either as a mentor or kind of helped guide you on your way?
I was very fortunate. My parents, so we grew up in a suburb of LA, inland in Southern California, and it was a little bit more diverse, but we had gang problems and different things. It was a little more low income. And by the time it was time for me to go to high school, my parents paid off their house and were able to buy a house in a different neighborhood. And so that neighborhood was a little bit more well off. And so I had opportunities that I wouldn't have had necessarily in the old town. So I had great coaches who I looked up to and just taught me that the value of hard work, and it was in line with how I was raised. And just a lot of different teachers. Even in elementary school, I had great teachers that I guess we didn't have as overcrowded of an issue with classrooms.
Sure.
And so I felt like even though I was quiet, they did tend to my needs, and they highlighted some of my intellectual side. So I jumped into honors classes in high school. My sophomore year, I think, is when I first found out that honors classes even existed. And so I was able to join some of those classes, and it set me up to eventually get accepted at UCLA once I left high school.
Well, that's amazing. Did you go on a scholarship to UCLA or playing soccer, or was that just separate?
I don't know if I would have qualified for that, only because I hadn't been playing as long. I literally only played in high school.
Sure.
And had I known, I probably would have known to invest more into that talent. But I mean, I guess everything works out the way it should. I got accepted, and I did have some financial assistance, but because my parents were homeowners, I really ended up with a lot of loans.
Sure.
And so a tragic incident happened after high school, and my dad passed away in a car accident. And so my mom became a widow. But I knew that I had what it takes to succeed, because my parents always raised us to just get after things. And, they came to this country with nothing and always taught us to be grateful that we had an opportunity to use our talent for some good. Yeah. And so even though my father was gone, they both had invested so much into that foundation that when I did get accepted to college, I knew there was no way I was going to pass that up. So I would just write letters every year when they try to give us what's known as a plus loan, basically a parent loan. I didn't want my mom to have that loan, so I would always write a letter and just say, hey, my father doesn't exist anymore, so can you just give me the loan? So I did incur a lot of loans, but I knew it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up.
No, absolutely.
And so I just managed to get through it that way. And I made sure I graduated in 4 years. I know a lot of people take the 5 years, and I knew I didn't have that luxury, so I just hustled and got it done.
That's great. So were you working then and going to school at the same time?
I did get a job. And the beauty of, when you're financial aid, they do have a work study program where they allocate a certain amount of funding that you can work for in the university. And I did that the first couple of years, but then my housing package started to change. So I needed to live off campus the second 2 years. Sure. And at that point, I ended up signing a lease for a year-long lease, and I needed a summer job out there. So in that summer, there was an advertisement for an internship at a police department. That's basically they police the projects in LA. And I jumped into that internship, and it ended up being a great transition because the hours were super flexible, but I got to do things that I would have never even looked at police work had it not been for that internship.
So when you started school, what were your inclinations of what you wanted to do? And did they stay consistent, or did that idea change as you were in school?
It varied a little bit. When I first went in, I thought I wanted to go to law school or something. And I took a couple actually I took one poli-sci class. I started in that major and I realized this is not for me. It's way too much history. I'm not a history buff. I knew right away this isn't it. So I also took an introductory psychology class, and I found that I really enjoyed that. And so I switched my major to psychology. And I was still looking in the legal field, but then I started to look at the federal law enforcement side, so the FBI or some of those opportunities. And I kind of stayed in that track thinking that's where I wanted to go. Even as an intern in the police department, I still felt that I wanted to go there. And the only difference is that for the federal jobs, you had to be 25, and I graduated college at 21. So one of the sergeants at the police department pulled me aside and said, "Hey, why don't you just apply with us? If nothing else, you get good experience. You learn how to talk to people. You learn legal foundations. And if you still have the bug, then go for it at 25." And I thought that makes perfect sense. So I ended up going to the academy. A week after I graduated from college, I was in the police academy. And I'm super grateful for them because because of that, working there, I fell in love with police work. I understood that there was a mission that had to do with helping the community. And also it was fun for a 21-year-old that's athletic. It was a fun job.
And it sounds like some of that early fundamental value kind of shifted into what you wanted to do with your career, which is help others. Right.
That's totally, and my parents just always thought of that gratitude too, of, there are opportunities here that we wouldn't have had back home. And even though they were nostalgic in a lot of their memories of being raised in their home country, they never overlooked or took for granted what we had in the United States. And part of being in a uniform there was something very honorable, and I don't want to say charitable, but I felt like I was giving back in gratitude for what the opportunities that we had.
Sure. I can't think of a better way. And it obviously was a good foundation for you that then opened up your eyes to some other avenues. One thing that I'm getting as a current theme is this diversification within yourself. Have pushed yourself in a lot of different directions, which I think has made you as a whole really well-rounded.
Yeah. And
what were the first steps then? You started out working police field, if you will. Where did it go from there?
One of the things I valued about working in the police field is the schedule. They work a compressed schedule that's 3 days a week, 12 and a half hours. And I worked a lot of overtime the first few years just to pay off college and save some money, buy a house, do all the responsible things that my parents had taught me to do. And then once things slowed down a little bit and it wasn't so new anymore, I was able to kind of sit back and just start exploring and go back to I've always been an avid reader. So just started reading a bunch of different stuff and just kept growing so that I could not just get comfortable. And I find that when I get bored, I get myself, I start to get upset and frustrated with life. So the more I just keep growing and have different perspectives, the healthier that I am. And both my parents were that way very much. I mean, especially being that they didn't know the language so well. Anytime they had something they needed to fix or whatever, it was always a matter of going to ask people who did know how to fix that issue. So if my dad didn't know how to fix an engine, or if there was any questions, I would always go with him and translate. And I realized that you should never be afraid to ask questions and to seek help, because people want to help and they're willing to share information. And that's how we're meant to succeed.
No, it seems to make sense. The way that you view things and your niche, it's all related and it's all interwoven. And I think it's amazing how you've been able to kind of spread your knowledge out in a way that really made you well-rounded. This transitioned into keynote speaking, career strategy, leadership coach. How did those initial steps start? How did this diversity or this branch into this other area of your career? How'd that begin?
Sure. I was very fortunate that while working in law enforcement, I was assigned to a Homeland Security detail for a good 6 years. Part of it started as oversight of a regional training program, an exercise program, where I helped equip first responders to be operationally ready to respond to threats or natural disasters. And also, it included a couple of years working at a local fusion center, which is basically an intelligence center. And my role there was to assess and consult with businesses and organizations to make sure that they were resilient in their operations should any threat happen. And so I learned that I really liked doing the whole consulting and teaching and coaching then. And I knew that one day when I retired, I would want to get into this coaching field and do some consulting and maybe even some keynote speaking. And I got to the point in my career where I had promoted to field supervisor, and I was starting to look at promoting to the higher levels. And it just wasn't aligning. It just didn't feel right. The timing didn't feel right. And so I had to kind of sit back, and I'm a person of faith. So I did some praying, and I felt like I was being called elsewhere. And I started dabbling into some coaching mentors, I guess. And I went to a 4-day retreat on speaking and coaching, and I realized, okay, this is viable. This is a thing. There's people out there doing this thing. And if I had to do it part-time while I'm still working, then it is possible. And so I decided to jump into that earlier than I thought I would be able to do it. And I actually really enjoy it.
Nice. It's amazing when you're in the spot that's right for you in life, how it's validating. I feel like it's laying a lot of seeds, and as you lay the seeds and you continue to put in the efforts, it's amazing how you watch that grow.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I feel I one of the things I coach on is purpose. And I feel like sometimes people want to find this perfect piece. I'm square. I want to find this square hole. And you look for a job description or an assignment out there that fits you, and it may not exist. And so I actually remind people that you don't have to have exact clarity about where you need to be. You just need to understand where you are right now, what kind of things you enjoy doing and don't enjoy doing, and just jump at opportunities that might be a big unknown, but you may love. And, you don't have to have absolute certainty. This is it. Just try it. And I think that's been why my career has lined up the way it has. And my path has been super unique. And I believe everyone's path should be unique. I've taught mentors that weren't great mentors. And the reason they were not great mentors is they gave me advice about what worked for them. And I think when you give advice as a mentor, you have to listen to the person and where they've been and understand what their needs are and give advice accordingly and say, hey, I've tried this before and this is why it worked. It may or may not work for you, but also you could try these other options. And I think when you empower people to be in a position to make better decisions, that's when real mentoring happens, because you need to be able to own the consequences of your decisions. And if you're just doing things because other people said it's not as rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how the development of self goes into career as well. Getting that well-rounded base is really important. One of the things that I find too is as you grow into a field, there's an initial period of, I think the correct term is imposter syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
Did you go through that as you started getting in here?
I think we all go through that at some point. I think there's times when you feel you lack the confidence to be where you're at. And I think rather than feel like an imposter, we need to just embrace the fact that the natural course of growth is that you have to be uncomfortable for a little bit. You have to feel like when you learn to ride a bike, you're falling, you have no balance, you look wobbly. but the only way to learn is to actually ride the bike. And I think sometimes we feel like we shouldn't apply to ride a bike until I know how to ride the bike, but that's not how it works. Do you have the capacity to ride the bike? And if the answer is yes, then apply for it, and then learn when you get there.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing that holds people back is you want to get there and feel like, oh, I'm here, so therefore I need to step up and people are expecting me to know what I'm doing. But I think it's more realistic when you say, I know that there are some needs here that I can help you fulfill. I don't know everything right now, but I'm here to learn. And I think that's more natural, and people actually respect when you approach things that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Rapport that you have with people is important. And I think a lot of that develops just communicating on a level like we are now. Mm-hmm. As you've dealt with corporate culture, that's another thing that you focus on. I'm wondering the difference between corporate culture and society as a whole, if you will. Maybe that's not a good way to put it, but hopefully you'll understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I do. I think as a society, most cultures inside businesses are a microcosm of the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And not to say that it's identical, but certainly the people are the same. So when you go to work, and like in America, we really value hustle and bustle, like work all these hours and hurry up and try to fit in the workout and try to fit in all these things. And we don't value rest as much, even though there's value in resting, and there's value. The innovation comes from resting. The creativity comes from resting, and we don't make time to rest the way we should. And so not only in our personal lives, but at work, we're just squeezing every last bit of life out of ourselves. And to one end, like what are we really getting at some point?
Right. It's important to find that balance between business and personal life. If you neglect one or the other, there's always consequences. For you,
and
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think we seek that balance, but I think we need to do more, because I think burnout is real. Even if you were to balance it out temporarily, the demand is always there for more to be done.
Sure.
And I think until we can find the healthy boundaries that say, I need to build in actual rest, real time off, real vacations, and I have to be able to afford them. So I'm going to have boundaries as to how I command my worth and what I do. Mm-hmm. And until we can really demand better from our places of work, it's not going to change. If someone else is still willing as a society, if there's other people who don't value that rest or that human need, then we're going to continue and driving ourselves into this endless burnout cycle.
Yeah. Well, and what you're talking about is affecting mental health.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And creating an environment for a more positive and catering to a better mental health atmosphere, I think is important. Have you found that there's been a change in focus on that?
Yes. And I'll speak to the industry that I'm in, which is law enforcement. I think we've done a better job of understanding that mental health matters in the way that we have high suicide rates. Many people wouldn't know that, high divorce rates, high alcoholism in some cases. Mm-hmm. There are things that are affecting the industry that we need to be better able to prevent, because by the time we get to those extreme cases, it's too late. And I think we've become more sensitive to the fact that we're dealing with humans, and we need to tend to those needs a little bit better. And there's more referrals, more peer support, more resources that are available to address issues early on. And I think leadership has gotten better about recognizing when we need to pause and hit a timeout and say, hey, let's get you some help, and let's see if we can get you healthy again.
Right.
And that's definitely been a welcome change. And I think overall as a society, we're probably getting better about not stigmatizing, for example, suicidal thoughts or things that are extreme or maybe seems like it only happens to certain people. I think we're embracing the fact that maybe it doesn't only happen to certain types of people, that none of us are really immune from having really depressing days. And we need to be better with one another to just offer the help that is needed and not be afraid to talk about it.
And you started kind of branching into avenues to try to help these particular people? For instance, you have a podcast, you started getting into some of the areas that maybe there were cracks in.
Sure. I think that for people who want to change things and turn it around, this podcast is for you. I think that the days of burning people out when they come to work, we enter the workforce at age, let's say 18 to 21, or maybe sooner for some people. But and then you retire eventually, say age 50 to 65, depending on your industry. And these are your prime years. You're spending them at work. And it shouldn't be the case that you retire and you're just trying to get your time back or recuperate or recover from all those years of working. You should retire feeling like you left your mark, you did something amazing, and now I get to enjoy my life, but I don't have to like nurse my wounds from all those years of work. Right. I shouldn't be divorced. I shouldn't have all these voids in my life. It should be a time of I'll be available, next to the pool. If anybody has an issue, they can call me and say, hey, wise one, how did you handle this when you face this issue? And you spend a good 2-3 hours because you got nothing better to do. In a perfect world, I feel like that's what would happen. Maybe that's not everyone's cup of tea, but I'm using it as an example that our years of work shouldn't be the years that took the life out of us. Mm-hmm. And so we cover mostly leadership topics. The World Health Organization, I think in 2019, recognized that burnout's a real issue. They haven't called it a disease, and I don't know that it needs to be called a disease, but they recognize that it's a real issue. And an article at Harvard Business Review identified that this is a leadership issue, that people can do all the self-care in the world, but that's not enough to prevent burnout, because if the culture still sucks in the workplace, you're still going to have the burnout. You can have that massage, that spa day over the weekend, and come back Monday morning and be right back where you were on Friday.
Right.
Because the culture is the issue. And I do believe there's ways to coach people that are in terrible cultures into thriving in those cultures, but it does require a very deep sense of maturity and commitment. It's not easy. It can be done, and you can be the catalyst to change the culture, but you probably won't succeed in overhauling the culture completely without the support of leadership.
Sure.
And so I think leadership is at the heart of everything. And until we have people from the top really influencing and changing the culture, it's really going to continue to burn people out.
Yeah. You talk about emotional intelligence too. And I think that's a point that I'd like to talk about. Could you explain what you share about that?
Oh, yeah. That's huge. There's a lot of research that supports how emotionally intelligent people make better humans and better leaders, and that the people around these emotionally intelligent people generate better results. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because they take the time to understand what's going on with the people around them. Mm-hmm. It's not a self-centered approach to business. It's not about me. Let me see the other person. Let me understand the other person. All the things that we get taught, for example, with communication, listen and seek to understand first. If you're not emotionally intelligent, you're going to mess that up. It's just not easy for you because you're so self-absorbed that your emotional needs have not been met. And so you're kind of in survival mode. And you may perceive threats that aren't there from other people, where someone might be having a bad day and you think they're somehow a threat to you.
Sure.
And so I really spend time talking about forgiveness, talking about why it's important to take a step back and before confronting an issue, making sure that you've resolved the issue with yourself first so that you can have an intelligent conversation and not have people push your buttons in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And so we basically talk, I'm getting really practical here, but if I can give a personal example,
sure.
There was a time in my career, about 5-6 years into my career, where a peer saw me walking down the hallway, and I just remember he was a peer that I had worked closely with in a team, and we were always goofing off and laughing. But one of the days I saw him walking down the hall, and he says, "Hey, are you okay?" And I thought, why is he asking me if I'm okay? This is as normal a day as any. And I realized after stepping back that I was walking down the hallway, super focused on my task, super focused on things that needed to get done, that my face probably looked like I was upset. Mm-hmm. I wasn't. I just was real focused. And I realized, how often do I do this? And I lacked the self-awareness to understand how I was engaging with others in my workplace. And it isn't that something was wrong. It's just that I had failed to even pay attention to my own needs. And I wasn't showing up for people in a human, real way. I was not taking time to have that 2-second conversation, 2-minute conversation. How was your weekend? What did you do? Basic stuff where you're actually interacting with the people around you in a very normal way. When it's all about work, you're missing out on the richness and the fullness of the connections that you can have with others. And so for me, it was a turning point, and it was then a journey for me to learn how to have emotional intelligence. And it just changed everything of how I do work, but also how I lead. And because I took the time to do that early in my career, it has made me and saved me from so many issues as a leader now.
Yeah.
And I find that people are attracted to that vulnerable side that's willing to just be human. And people feel safe in that space and also are healthier themselves.
And this really kind of goes into like personal and professional development. These are the tools that you're focusing on, or these aspects of yourself. I think one of my favorite coin phrases that I've borrowed is "know thyself." Self-awareness can be just a double-edged sword, because often we see ourselves for how we're not. People might perceive us for other than who we think we are. But if we're open enough to all of that, we then can open up a different lens and kind of, I think, get closer to knowing ourselves. One of those things are knowing our strengths and weaknesses, where to put your efforts and your attentions. Not everybody's suited for the same unique path. And so custom tailoring that to those strengths, as you were talking about, it's really important. Now, there's some other things that go along with this too. There's purpose and fulfillment, but underlying all of that is a mindset that for you started early, and I think was found through example from your parents. How do you focus on mindset when you're trying to teach?
We stop everything. We assess where you are right now. So we really start every session with a big line of questions, right? I like to be conversational. I don't like to assign big, heavy homework assignments. I like to have a conversation where I'm asking a lot of questions. I have a huge investigative background on top of the natural curiosity that I always have for humans. So, in that first session, we sit down and we talk about where are you right now? Let's get a feel for where you're at. What are the areas where you're struggling? What are the things that are draining you, basically? And we immediately start injecting those times of rest, those times of let's get you to where we start valuing you. We start giving you some self-respect because you've been abusing yourself and you've given your power away. And that's why I talk about power a lot, powerful at work, and Empower to Bloom is the name of my business. Because when you empower people and you help them get their power back, now we can get going, because now you're going to be capable of enforcing your boundaries. You're going to be capable of saying no when you need to say no. You're going to be capable of not feeling guilty when you're not committing to something where you have no business being in it. When you do identify your strengths, you should know your weaknesses, but let's play to your strengths.
Right.
Because if it's not your strength, then let's delegate that to someone else, and let's have you stay in your zone of genius so that you can thrive. And really, the hours that you're going to invest in this need to be good hours.
Right.
Because you don't need to overextend yourself. And so we start now game planning a strategy of how to move forward, not just in your career, but so that you have time in your life to do the things you love and that bring you that fulfillment. Your work should be fulfilling, but if your home life is falling apart, then you're not going to be happy. So we look at the big picture, and again, we look at the entire individual.
Yeah, so a real big focus on self-care, getting yourself healthy and kind of refilling that cup so that you can move forward. Is that what I'm hearing? Yes.
And I think when you know what that's like, where you're in that zone of genius, you find that you have this never-ending fountain of of being able to give. Like, you're not going to run out because you're operating in that zone of strength. And I always look at potential as unlimited, because you're going to look for that next challenge and you get to grow all the more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a lifetime student, whether I'm in school or I'm observing from afar, if you will.
Yeah.
The more we focus on learning, becoming well-rounded within the strengths that we have, it creates that roll through life to be a little smoother. Life is always full of bumps, but when you are well-rounded in your knowledge and making sure that your personal needs and your business needs are in harmony with perhaps your values and some other things, it puts you in a zone that, like you said, the cup doesn't necessarily run empty when you're in your strength. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. And you're more resilient because you're not spinning so many plates in the air that, that one plate takes you out.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a handful of them, one may fall, but you have 2 or 3 others, but you're not so overextended that you think your whole world's going to collapse.
Right.
So you take yourself more serious in the sense of, I'm where I need to be and I'm giving my best here.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not the single point of failure because I've got so many things on my plate.
Right. I know that you talk a lot about faith in business. Can you talk a little bit about that with us today too?
Yeah, for me, faith has been huge. I actually was raised Catholic and always believed that there's a God out there who looks after us and is everywhere, and that we have faith that He provides. And growing up, I know He did, because my parents, we never went without our essentials, and we knew that love was important, and it was very much a godly principle that you love God and you love your family and you love your parents. And there came a time in my mid-20s when I felt like I bought my house, I got my degree, I have a job, I'm doing everything that I was meant to do. Why is there still a void in my life? And so I started doing some soul searching. And at the time, my boyfriend had a Bible, and I had not been raised Christian like he had been. And so I started asking some questions about Christianity. And one of my cousins is a PhD in literature, and she actually had become Christian. So as I was reading the Bible, I had a lot of questions, and she was the person that I would go to. And she made the stories very easy to understand. And I started going to a local Christian church. And after a few months, I realized, man, there's something to this. It doesn't have to be any big religion, any crazy thing. It's just a matter of choosing to have a relationship with a very real God. And I understood that Christ died on the cross and now was alive next to God the Father. And because of that, I could have a relationship with Him. But I didn't need to do anything fancy, that it was already done for me. So I had an encounter with God, which I can only describe as this supernatural experience of love. It was just a presence and something that was very calming and just, I was loved in such a deep way that I couldn't deny that He was real and that I could have a connection with Him. And so I made a decision to serve Him, and I haven't looked back. And because of that relationship, I realized that I have access to someone who knows everything, and I don't have to know it all. And I also don't have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. I know I talk about changing the world, but I really look at it more in terms of, I do my part and God does the rest. I invest into others, and then others invest into more. And as we connect in that way and as we love each other, the world changes.
Yeah. The waves of positive deeds and how that spreads to the community and the world affects people on so many levels. And the effect of that is incalculable.
Yeah, and the opposite is also true. I think you're in the United States, but we've had, if you look at our elections and just the place that we've been, everybody's pointing at each other and everybody's divisive, and it's like, so the opposite is super harmful. We know that firsthand,
right?
And so for sure we need to get back to the part where we love each other and get together and really really decide what is it that we want for ourselves here and how do we get there as a community.
Yeah. There's been a lot of community action, even within my own community. There was a Pay It Forward group started in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, which is where I live. But it's those types of groups and the community drawing together. Those waves have been very impactful within my community, and you can feel it. There was such a tension before when everything was just going to hell. And now there's a positivity that's spreading. The group for this particular Pay It Forward is over 2,000 members now. And the amount of effect that they're doing in the community is amazing. Because right now, at least where I'm at, the need is great by so many. And there's a lot of people that have but didn't know how to give. And so these are starting to pop up. And I think it's a great template for all communities. It really helps to bring that positive aspect forward. There's something to be said about giving, but there's also something to be said about receiving. Very humbling, very gratitude, very appreciative. It's just it's great. It's been a great effect.
Yes, I want us to highlight those examples more because I think you're right. I think that we kind of, the negative is so easy to see, but I think you're right. There's people that are stepping out of the woodworks to say, this isn't who I want to be, and it's time to change. And I think we need to highlight that more and create more momentum behind those efforts because that's what's going to make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. I look at us as a people, and our government's so big, but at the same time, it's so small. It's a fraction of us that's representing it. And at the same time, life occurs outside of Capitol Hill in our homes and in our communities. And that's where the start of these positive waves need to begin, in my opinion.
I completely agree.
Selfless deeds, going to church, if you're in a bad mental health state, it has been so helpful for me to go and listen to a sermon. Perhaps you're not very religious or maybe you haven't given your life to Christ yet. But the lessons and teachings and sermons that you get from a good church they spread across the borderlines, if you will. You don't need to be a Christian to take away the lessons that are being given every day, through the church.
Yeah, no, we got to feed our soul for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you've been focused on doing this. I want to kind of change this a little bit as we start to wrap up. I'd like to hear a little bit about family, your priorities, and how you keep the balance. But more importantly, how has COVID affected your life?
COVID, I've been so fortunate. I know that you have a different experience, but I've stayed healthy. My family's been healthy. Although there are people I know and love who have had the virus, my immediate family, my mom, my brothers, my nieces, and my people that I see daily, they've been healthy, and I've been super fortunate about that. I'm still on the job. I still go to work every day because I'm considered essential, and so it affected me in the ways that we handle certain things, but nothing compared to some people who the quarantine has impacted them immensely. I've responded to situations where people they need their routines, they need their interaction with people physically, and it's not just the fact that people got the virus, it's the fact that the changes that happen in our society really affected people's lives, and it was an interruption that many people were not ready to have. And I think as a society, we need to step back. When you start talking about how little government is, I think it's clear that even though government had a role in this, we looked to them to solve a problem that really we needed to solve locally.
I agree.
Because if you have neighbors that don't do well in isolation, you should be able to go check on them. And it's just we need to bring that back for sure.
Yeah. The mental health has definitely been affected for most since the
Yes.
pandemics began. Um, I know that suicide rates and a lot of other rates are up in terms of depression, anxiety, and things like that.
Yes.
I think a good spot for us to start finding our mental health is take a Sunday someday, guys, and just
Yes.
visit your local church and listen to a good sermon and be inspired. I think another thing that comes along with that is you realize you're not alone, and the sense of community that we've been lacking as a result of the pandemic. You get at least a little bit of that when you go and you congregate with your fellow community members within the church. So,
Yeah, and if you haven't been doing it online, a lot of the churches have opened up their parking lots, and if you need that in-person feel, there's churches out there that are accommodating this, and
yeah,
thank goodness for that.
Absolutely. Anything I didn't cover that you'd like to mention? What's 2021 looking like for you? What kind of things you got planned?
I'm an optimist. I will be always an optimist. Going back to how I was raised, I think 2021 is, because I think even though we can look funny for all the tragedies that it brought, I think when tragedy happens and adversity happens, it really forces you to think about your priorities and the things that really matter. I'm hopeful that as a community, we're starting to recognize that maybe we've been investing in all the wrong things, and maybe we've been asking the government to do that we are very capable of doing ourselves, and maybe we don't need dependency, and hopefully it would eliminate a lot of the fighting that's happening. But ultimately, I think that the strength of our community can only get better. We can only get better from here. And I'm seeing enough people stepping in that direction that I'm hopeful that we're going to be healthier in 2021 in more ways than one.
Yeah, me too. I'd like to ask one last question. When it comes to corporate culture, is there a change for climate change right now is all the headlines? Is there a corporate cultural shift to be more responsible within current operations to minimize and mitigate some of the issues that are contributing to global warming or climate change?
I think many organizations are being responsible, and ultimately, this is a perfect example that I would highlight as we're asking the government to regulate and regulate and regulate, but unless the people actually believe it's the solution, all the regulation in the world is still not going to be in the room when decisions are being made. We can still check a box and make sure we followed that regulation. But in the room, if we're not being creative with our solutions, and if we're not being creative with our decision making, and we're not making time to empower the right people to say, let's look at this again and see if we can do it better, or let's slow down, because even though this satisfies the legal requirements, it may still be a negative impact, and maybe we can slow down long enough to make it right. Right. Unless we really as a community bring our core values back into the workplace, all the regulations in the world aren't going to change anything. And so I think it's a good place to say, no, well, and the other part of this is it's hard to trust any specialist right now. Yes, there's a lot of headlines, but there's so much disagreement. Right. And that may not be unusual on its own face. Like coming out of a degree like psychology, you have all these experiments, and people prove that this is the case, but then you find another experiment that disproves it, and you go back and forth. So the experts don't always agree anyway, but at least the trust would be there if it were authentic, right? If I felt like the people in government that represent us truly do want to make the world better and truly do want to keep us from harming our environment, then at least let's try some things and see what works. But I think most people fail to trust in the government because of the way they're acting. And until we can resolve that issue, so the first issue would be the core values in the workplace, and the second issue would be, we need to grow up in the way that government is representing us. I think that we need to build that trust and establish it again before we can really make a difference.
All right. Well, that was going to be my last question, but one more. When did corporate values start leaching out? And was there something that you can identify that really started to change that industry in terms of culture?
I think core values aren't a new conversation, right? Every organization just about has a mission, has their values written down, has something written down. But why I decided to go into coaching and why I feel like the approach that I take, which is to connect with the CEO, and then if they recognize that they don't know how to teach leadership or they don't know how to empower their people, we come in and do a done for you service where we train your team for you. But unless the leader truly slows down enough to recognize her own core values or his own core values so that they become real in the organization and that they enroll people into them truly as humans first, and then in the work, until that is the approach that we take, I don't see it actually becoming real. It's very similar to the example of gave of regulations, right? You can say these are it, and I can make it appear that I'm following those values, but in reality, I could go deeper with my decisions, and I'm not doing it because I'm not enrolled in the values. So, so I think that's where companies are having results. That's what's happening. The leader is owning the core values and is doing a really good job of enrolling their people in.
That's great. Well, at least it's starting to make a change.
Yes.
It has been a pleasure talking with you. You can tell that you are very well-rounded, very insightful, what you bring to the table in terms of understanding within some of the niches of what you do, law enforcement background, and then how you've crafted this into still a way to help and make a difference and change the world. and I believe God just smiles on you. It's those types of seeds that you are planting that I hope you see resonate. And you've been in it long enough. Have you been very validated? And is it a humbling thing when you look back at the differences that you started to make?
Oh, absolutely. It's humbling that I even get to do this, because I feel like my life is a little bit surreal. I would have never planned it this way. And I'm thankful that God orders our steps. But absolutely, I think anytime people give you access to themselves and they allow themselves to trust you with their future, it's humbling. Even before we do anything, the fact that we're establishing this connection, like, that's humbling by itself, because people don't have to do that. People have a choice.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's rewarding to be part of the journey of someone else's growth.
Yeah. Well, you've definitely humbled me today. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I'm going to be putting links to you in our description. Obviously, your podcast, Powerful at Work, that's an Apple podcast. I'll have the link in the description. Anything else that I can promote for you? Yeah,
we have a workshop very regularly. Just visit my website and we'll get you connected to all of our offerings. But we have a Facebook community called Empower to Boom Tribe, and we have a community there where I put tons of free content out there. If you want to get around people that are searching and wanting to be better, that's definitely the place to be. But thank you for having me and for being so complimentary as well. I think what you're doing by having people like me come and have conversations that others can also be motivated to start having these conversations.
Yeah, that's the hope. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much. You have yourself a wonderful day.
You too.
All right, bye now.
This has been Digital Voices with Bo Tiffany, exploring deep stories from real-life guests with real-life experiences, providing insight to our listeners with every story. Stay up to date on future podcasts by bookmarking Digital Voices with BoTiffany.podbean.com and follow Bo on social media by searching Digital Voices with Bo Tiffany. Have an idea for a future story? Send your idea to acrmadison@gmail.com. Until next time, grab life by the horns and keep inspiring others.